This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So it's super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional, and also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you, and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing. And it's overall just a really good feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then 3rd, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face to face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there.
Hey Nomads, this is Dylan coming at you from quarantine. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dylan Callier, and I have some great news. I finally figured out how to record without needing internet. So for all my previous episodes, I've been using a program or several programs that allow me to record, but I have to have access to internet in order for it to work. Funny enough, my laptop wasn't able to just record on its own, so I ended up having to figure out a back way into being able to record without internet. And so I was able to do that. So now I'm able to record wherever I'm at. I don't have to worry about stable internet anymore. And the reason that's an issue, or why that's a big deal, is because when I'm at home, or if I'm outside in an area that doesn't have great internet, or if I'm in another country that doesn't have great internet, I've been unable to record. Usually what happens is there's a giant lag, and it makes the audio editing process like unbearable to where you can't use the recording anymore. But today we are talking about my Peru trip, specifically me getting stuck in Peru while I was down doing my 3-month tour of South America. So I'm going to give that story here, just kind of going through in detail what all happened while over there. It was definitely crazy. It was a crazy ride. Ultimately, I was very, very fortunate for everything that happened to me and my travel partner, Jess, and would not have been able to come home as I did without the support of my friends, my family, and everybody who helped me reach out to congressmen and congresswomen in order to get me home. So thank you so much for everybody who helped. Originally, I just kind of splat out the big long story, and it can get kind of confusing. So I think I'm going to break it up into 2 parts. This first part is going to be the story of just me and Jess and our friends and what happened. And then the second story is going to be more focused on how people helped us get out. And also kind of the story of what governmental support we had, what governmental support we largely did not have, and some of the nonprofit organizations that tried to help get us home. And so there's kind of two different stories that were going on. And when I try and tell them both at the same time, it got really confusing. So I'm just going to focus on my story for this first part and then the government story for the second part. And so I have my list here. If you're watching on YouTube, hi. So you might see me glancing at my phone because I don't want to kind of miss any parts as I'm going through on this story. But I have a goal of living on every continent before I turn 30. And living on every continent, I've been able to live on, counting South America, 4 continents. And that's not visiting, that's not, stopping by on a plane. It's physically being on that continent for at least 30 days and enjoying the culture and getting to feel what it is like to be there. 30 days for now, we'll see what happens with Antarctica. If I'm able to do longer, then I'll be able to extend longer. But that's the continent that is elusive currently, because you can only do a cruise there. So unless you're planning on working there on a military base, it's going to be not very financially savvy in order to try and cruise there and stay there for that long. So I have this goal, and this year my goal was to go to South America. This was my second solo trip that ended up turning into my first ever partner trip. And so the first solo trip I ever took was to Thailand and Indonesia. Did a couple podcasts on that. And ultimately, I was not nervous for that trip. I'd been told a lot that everybody speaks English. There's not going to be a language barrier. No worries. It's a high tourist area, so they're used to it. However, for South America, I was nervous. I tried not to show that to my family because they were very, very nervous. They were very scared. They would ask me all these questions, and then I would answer them. And then a week later, they're asking the same questions, and I would have to answer them. And when you have all these questions and fears and people around you kind of just continually asking you these fear-based questions or trying to talk you out of it, you start getting nervous. And I was already nervous, but when you're around that, you really start to get nervous. And so I stopped really talking about it altogether because I didn't want to feel any more guilty for going there or any more nervous than I already was. So the plan was to go down for 3 months. I was going to be working on the nonprofit with the Travelers Conference. I was going to be working on the for-profit with Nomadicare. Some of these things ended up changing, and I ended up having a lot more free time than I anticipated. And so I thought it was going to be a very slow travel adventure. It was going to be a different type of experience with me spending a month here, a month here, a month here, and I was only going to go maybe like 3 cities total. However, now I had all this, a lot more free time than I originally planned for. And my trip started in Colombia, in Medellin. It looks, when you're reading it, it looks like Medellin. And once you start learning a little bit of Spanish, it's Medellin. And then once you start learning that Colombians do juz and not yuz, it's Medellin. And so that's the first place I showed up to. And I was not only nervous for South America, but I didn't know if I'd like it all that much. And it ended up being my favorite trip so far. From the moment I landed in Medellin, I landed about 4 p.m., 5 p.m. I was trying to get in before the sunset, which, by the way, is only from Medellin to Florida is only 3 hours. From Medellin to Texas is only 4 hours. It's so fast of a plane ride compared to Thailand, which is like a whole 2 days. And I got there. I was trying to find a SIM card, phone card. I'll have a whole separate story on how exactly I navigated this whole trip. But I ended up going to Medellin, got there, messed around at the airport trying to figure some things out. I ended up spending too much time, and now it was dark, and I'm having to call a taxi and ride into the city. 25 years ago, Medellin used to be the murder capital of the world. Now it is doing much, much better. And that's kind of where a lot of the fear comes from that you hear people talk about. And a lot of the older travelers remember that when you bump into them about friends they had that came to the city and got kidnapped or whatever it might be. And so I didn't necessarily want to ride in at night. It ended up being super safe, really, really safe. Got in a taxi. It was 7 p.m., 8 p.m., drove into the city, and I don't know what I was expecting, but just that first night coming in, it was rolling hills, and it's the first time I've ever seen a city sitting on top of rolling hills. And the lights from the hills, from all the houses and the buildings, was just absolutely gorgeous. And just immediately was in awe of this city. The first week I was still working hours, and so I was doing a lot of time there. Ended up weaning off hours, and I got to make a choice. So I either could, with all this free time, kind of go out and explore more than I thought, travel around more like I typically did in Thailand and Indonesia, where I was only staying max 3 nights in a city, or max 3 nights in a town and then move on. Or I could kind of take it slow and kind of still have that original experience I was planning on. And I ended up wanting to stay at least one more week. For that first week, I realized that the language barrier was a real thing. It was very hard, and I understood no one to the point where I wasn't really comfortable with getting on the subways or the trail systems or the metros, or just going into these major touristy areas with a lot of persons around. I didn't speak the language. I felt very nervous, and so I didn't feel that confident. So I at least wanted to do 1 week Spanish classes, and then if I felt comfortable, start traveling around. Or that was the plan. 1 week of Spanish lessons, and then comfortable or not, I was going to go to the coast, get me some beach time. Well, I ended up looking around. I was going to go to this one school, ended up meeting a local. She said, no, don't go there. Go to this place. They're awesome. It was called Blink Spanish School, Blink Spanish Immersion. And this was a very inspirational school, very, very cool. I will definitely be sitting down with the owner and talking about his business and his missions and values and goals with this. But Blink Spanish ended up being a really cool place to learn and almost a community to be a part of. The reason being, it was founded by a guy from the U.S., came in, was only going to stay in Medellin for a couple weeks, ended up falling in love, decided to not go back home. And so he ended up having some difficulties learning Spanish. He wanted to open up his own school. He didn't like how the schools were doing it there. So him and a few locals decided to open up their own Spanish school. Opened up the Spanish school, had a hostel on the inside. They were doing everything right. They were making cemented bunks so that your bed's not shaking and rattling when you're moving around at night. Eventually, they got so many students that they needed to start outsourcing kind of beds to stay. They started renting some building space around them. They made a laundromat for the workers and the students that were going there. They ended up opening a restaurant. This restaurant was now feeding the employees there 2 meals a day. All their employees were pious. They were all from Colombia. And so it all of a sudden became this very community staple in that small little area, in that small little section, where all the locals went to that restaurant to eat. He was paying all the employees very, very well, including the teachers, which was starkly different from a lot of the other schools. And so this school started impacting lives, not only the travelers learning Spanish, but also the local community and being really ingrained with that. And so it was very inspirational. When I came in, I ended up taking those Spanish classes for a week. I was doing like 6 hours a day and ended up learning more in that week on Spanish, all the rules and stuff, versus the 2 years that I took in high school. Like, it was just their program was so well done. And I ended up making friends. I ended up just falling in love with the city. It was very inspirational. Got to learn a little bit more of the history while I was there. and I wanted to stay longer. It was the first time I've ever wanted to stay longer than my original plan. And so I ended up actually staying in Medellin for a month. I did not go outside and tour other spots of Colombia really until I was moving down to Ecuador. But it was the first place that I felt like I could actually live there. I've been so jealous of all these travelers that I've been talking to that, I've been traveling for 3 years, and since I started the podcast, before I started traveling, talking with people and them saying, oh yeah, once I got to San Diego, I was like, oh, this is forever home, or Hawaii, or I hear that about Denver. And I've gone to these places, well, except for Hawaii. I've gone to most of these places and I just didn't feel it. And so I was so jealous of just like looking for, that feeling of, oh, this could be a home potentially. And it starts getting worrisome because you're like, oh, am I, never going to be satisfied? Am I always going to be on the run, on the move? Which sounds exciting, but also at the same time sounds really tiring. So we'll see what happens. But this was the first place I was like, oh, this could be a home. So that's the backstory. Went to Colombia. After Colombia, took a long, long bus ride to Ecuador. And then this is where I met my travel buddy, Jess. Jess is the first person to take me up on, hey, you should just come along when I talk about my travels. I'll be talking about my plans with friends, with family, and they say, wow, that sounds so cool. And I usually extend out an offer and say, hey, like, if you are more than welcome to come along, to join along. I'll be there. We can split housing. It's going to be cheaper that way. All these incentives. And I've done this for a while. And no one's ever taken me up on it until Jess. So Jess took me up on it. She came down to Ecuador and we started doing lots of hikes. We started seeing cities. We enjoyed Carnival while we were down there in Ecuador. Well, she did. I got super, super sick. That'll be another story for like 3 days. And then after Ecuador, we went to Peru. Now, Peru wasn't necessarily on my list when I was getting ready for this trip. I was between, at the time when I thought I was only going to be moving like 3 times total max during this trip, I thought it was going to be Colombia, Argentina, and then it was either going to be Peru or Ecuador. I was kind of hesitant on Peru just because I guess I still have a little bit of hipster, or I guess, just being that all travelers go to Peru and they all have been to Machu Picchu and they all talk about this. And I kind of wanted my own like stories and adventures. And so I wasn't going to do Peru originally. I was just going to do Colombia, Ecuador, and then to Argentina. My friend ended up talking me to go to Peru, at least 2 weeks in Ecuador and then 2 weeks in Peru. So Peru is now on the list. We go through customs at Ecuador. Peru is very interesting. It is very difficult to navigate or get anywhere because it's just difficult. We were staying in a hostel one night and the guy kind of running it, Peru just likes to make things difficult, or I guess that's part of their culture. I don't know. Just things are a lot more difficult than they need to be. There's not a system to it. It's just, it is what it is. It's Peru. And so the first time that we realized this is crossing from Ecuador to Peru. In Colombia and Ecuador, they have bus systems there. It's kind of like a normal bus area that you go to in any country. You go to a bus station. There's like 5 different companies there that run buses through, and then you hop on the one that you need. Sometimes they're not always on time. Sometimes the bus number doesn't matter. Sometimes it's hardly ever does the seat matter. But usually it's all in one spot. Maybe there's a couple different bus stations inside the city, and that's it. Peru, no. At least in northern Peru, they don't have bus stations. They have many bus companies, but they're not all at one station. So if you see, there's 3 different companies that will take us from northern Peru, Trujillo, down to Vicabamba, or whatever it might be. You go, and if your company doesn't have that ticket or that bus or it's full, then you have to walk 5 blocks to the next bus company. If that company doesn't have what you need to, then you walk 5 blocks to the next bus company. And there's not one bus station, so there's bus companies. So say you have a layover. You go from this city to this city, you get off at that bus company. You don't stay there. You have to go to the next bus company. So you're like carrying all of your stuff, maybe 10 blocks down to the next bus company in order to catch that bus to go to that next spot. Northern Peru was just very hot. It was a desert. I wasn't really expecting that, but a lot of the towns we went to were very poor, or at least it looked like it. A lot of rundown buildings. It honestly looked like the Middle East, like what I would expect the Middle East to look like when I go there. And it was just not a pleasant place to be. And very hot. The buses were muggy. I was getting frustrated with the whole bus company situation. Of course, there's a language barrier. I'd been speaking Spanish at this point for a month and a half. So I was able to get across some words. I knew what I wanted to say, but it was hard for me to understand persons talking. And so you'd be running around and you'd be trying to communicate with people. And so it was very frustrating. We would get to a city, it'd be 7 p.m., 8 p.m. at night. All the stuff would be closed down. There would be no place to eat, so now you're hungry. These are the kind of the things about travel that are less glamorous. And so, by the way, Colombia and Ecuador were flipping awesome. Like, I don't want this that part of the story to take away from the trip because it's absolutely amazing. Again, my favorite trip that I've ever had. I'll go into all the really, really cool stuff in another episode. But that was my first experience of Peru. Not only did I not necessarily kind of want to go there, first of all, I was still kind of on the fence. And then northern Peru was just not pleasant. Not a pleasant place to be. Now, finally, we got to a place that Jess planned. And so she wanted to surprise me with a hike. And the hiking in Peru is absolutely phenomenal. I was not expecting it. We did several hikes in the area, but the one hike that was just absolutely amazing was Laguna 69. And you get to the top and there's just neon blue water that I've only seen once during a hike in Colorado called Ice Lake. And it was just absolutely amazing. And so we're doing all these hikes. We're like, I think 3 days straight of hiking on one of the stints, and we needed to take a couple of days and relax. And the mountains and the hiking for sure make up Peru. There was a 7-day trek. I forget the name at the time. I'll put it in the show notes because I'll be able to look it up. That's the second most gorgeous trek in the world. I don't know who votes that, but it is. And so after these amazing hikes, we then went down to Lima. We didn't really want to stay in the big city. There wasn't anything in Lima that really pulled us. It was just another city at this point. So we stayed there like 4 hours, 6 hours tops, and got a plane ride from Lima to Cusco. It would have been like a 24-hour bus ride. On the planes, it was only like a 3-hour flight, and that's just from the mountains. So we took the plane ride, went to Cusco. Cusco is where you have the Rainbow Mountains. It's where you have Machu Picchu. Cusco itself, just a cool city, cool colonial city to go and visit. And so while we were in Peru, that all we heard about was Cusco. So we were super excited to go to Cusco. Got to Cusco, started doing some trips and some travels. Wanted to stay in the city for a little bit. After Cusco, we were going to go to Bolivia, see the salt flats, and then go to Argentina. So around this time, while we were in Cusco, we start hearing about, I think right before we got to Cusco is when we started hearing about the coronavirus and COVID-19. At this time, it was just trickling in. And we were so disconnected from the world at that point that we were only hearing about it through like our parents and our friends. And at this time, all the media was playing it off super casually. Oh, it's a flu. It's just like the cold. No worries. No big deals. And so it was never on our radar at all. We got to Cusco. Things ramped up really quickly. All of a sudden, nations were starting to close down their borders, and U.S. was in talk about closing down their borders. And around this time, it was when Argentina was the first one to close down their borders from people traveling in. And so I knew that my rest of the trip wasn't going to be able to go as planned. Jess only planned on sticking until Bolivia, so at this point we were still trying to finish out the trip, and then we would head back, and then the plan was to start taking travel contracts as soon as we got back. We went to Machu Picchu, and so Machu Picchu, what happens is that you can either go there by two ways. You can either take a really fancy, expensive train directly from Cusco into Machu Picchu, or you can take a bus. The problem with the bus was that there was a big landslide, and so you had to take this bus to the landslide spot. You had to climb up this like wall type area and then get on a second van or a collectivo. They drive you to a spot. From that spot, you walk 3 hours or 4 hours on the railroad to Machu Picchu. And that's how you get there. So that's what we did. We took the cheaper route. Again, Peru makes everything so difficult. Trying to think of just buying tickets was even kind of a hassle because you don't know if the ticket you're getting is the ticket that you need. Everything's really unclear, or sometimes you go and try to give their tickets and they're like, oh no, and they won't accept it. But then like 10 minutes later, all of a sudden they are accepting it. And it's not like a time thing. It's just super confusing. And at this point, one of the confusing things was our tour guide told us that we will walk into this town, somebody will find us, and then they will take us to our hotel that we're going to stay for the night. It's only a one-night trip, so all you take with you is a day pack. 2 pairs of clothes, any super valuable stuff, and then you leave all the rest of your stuff back in Cusco. And so here we are with our day pack. We walk in. We thought it was going to rain. Luckily, it did not rain. Luck was on our side. And we get to this town, and we're just like walking around aimlessly because we don't know. We only know this guy's name that's supposed to meet us. We have no idea what he looks like. We're told nowhere of exactly where to meet him. And so we're just walking around. I think we walked around for maybe 40, 45 minutes. And finally, some guy, I guess, sees our bracelets that we had on. They're like bright neon pink, and tells us where we're going for our hotel stay. Tour guide could have easily just told us where we were going to stay that night, but no. Just how to make everything difficult. So we go drop our stuff off. Me and Jess then meet up with this guy for dinner. He gives us our Machu Picchu tickets. The dinner was included in the tour guide package, and it was not very filling. So I was still hungry after dinner, so me and Jess decided to go get second dinner. And it was during second dinner that we saw the Peruvian president come on TV, and I was picking up some of it, but not really able to follow a lot. I was able to tell that they were closing the borders, but I kept seeing a date for like 2 days later. So it's like, oh, they must be saying that they're going to close them in like 2 days. So we leave after second dinner. We then get dessert because, of course, I want some ice cream. And we get back to the hostel. We're going to go to bed early. It might have been like 9, 10 p.m. I start searching, trying to find out what exactly he was saying. Couldn't find anything on like the English channels. Started searching in Spanish. And then I can translate a lot better reading. And so I translated, and yeah, the borders were closing at midnight that night. So we had essentially 4 hours notice because he came on at 8. And then it went into effect at midnight that night that borders were officially closing. But the date that we saw for 2 days later was for airfare. So airports were still going to be able to fly as planned for 2 more days. At this point, we didn't know how it was going to affect. He was also talking about quarantine. They were reassuring people, don't rush the markets, don't do this, don't do that, you'll be taken care of, don't worry. And nobody panicked. There was no great emergency. There wasn't like a flood and all of a sudden you couldn't find toilet paper. Everything was really relaxed there. And so I knew that we had to get back to Cusco. I didn't know how the quarantine was going to be. I didn't know up until this point, like a lot of the local laws just weren't followed. And so I honestly, half of me thought that, okay, it's either going to be really shut down and weird, or it's going to be, the other half of me thought it's just going to be normal. Everything's going to be normal. There's not going to be a change. At this point, U.S. still hadn't closed their borders. I think we had just gotten our first few cases in Washington. Peru had 0 cases. And so talking with all parents up until this point, it was like, you honestly might be safer in Peru than here in the U.S. And I generally thought that. So I wasn't too worried. We were going to still try and go to Machu Picchu the next morning. Because, again, there was no reason to take this super seriously. There was no really extensive media coverage on this. I think at this point we both knew it was more serious than just the flu, but it wasn't drastic yet. And actually, that was the same night, kind of the first media coverage that we saw on it. There was a fear propaganda campaign by the local Peruvian media because it just showed guys in hazmat suits like spraying public spaces in Japan. There was a guy coming at police officers that were all hazmat suits. He had a mask on, and he takes off his mask and he starts like yelling at him. And he ends up getting tackled. They had some guy like have a net over his head, like a dog catcher. And Jess and I are just watching this, just like hysterically laughing, thinking, "Oh my gosh, how ridiculous is this?" And so we go to bed. The plan is to try and go to Machu Picchu, and then we're gonna catch our ride back the next day, like we planned. So we were going to be done with Machu Picchu at like 11 a.m. in the morning. It was super early. We woke up at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., something like that. And so we figured, we won't be able to get out of the town anyhow. So I didn't feel too guilty about trying to go see it because we weren't going to leave until noon anyways. So we get up, we walk an hour to the gates of Machu Picchu, and the gates are locked. And not only that, there are a bunch of white people standing around the gates. Not a good sign. And that was... No, the first time that I realized it was going to be something really serious was directly after that. When all these people are around, hardly anybody speaks Spanish going to South America. And so you're hearing all these hearsay stuff from these guys from Australia and these girls from Germany and people from England. And I go and talk to the 2 guards at the front of the gate, and everybody's like sitting there waiting to see if they open up the gates. And I asked them straight up, like, "Hey, can we go inside?" And they said, "No, it's impossible. Quarantine." I said, "Oh, okay." And they said, "You need to get out on the train." I said, "Wait, we came here on a bus." And they said, no buses. So basically what happened when they closed in the border, they canceled all the buses coming out of that town. They canceled most of the trains leaving that town as well, except for 2. Didn't know that at the time. So we had no way to get out of the small town. We have 2 days worth of clothes, which already one is spent. We're wearing the other pair. I'm the only one with a laptop. Jess's phone's not working for some reason. Everybody's waiting by Machu Picchu. And all of a sudden it becomes very real, like, oh no, we might actually get stuck here in this small town and not be able to get back to Cusco. Because at this point, I didn't know that nobody knew that they were going to be shutting down transportation between cities. So taxis weren't running anymore, buses weren't running anymore, trains weren't running anymore. Hey Nomads, you've just caught the end of the first part of the personal story and ended up having to break it up into 2 sections because it was a little bit longer than a usual episode. But that is the end. If you caught this on the Facebook page, New Medical Nomads Podcast, that's where I officially launched these episodes. But the early access to the next episode is going to be on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube. Again, any of the hard shares, comments, or likes, winky faces, anything of that regard helps more people to see this and allows us to help more people by getting this information out there. So thank you so much. You can catch the next episode here pretty soon. Everybody have safe quarantine. Everybody have safe travels.